Nobody was laughing by the time Eleanor Vance was finished, but Mr. Sterling and his lawyer were certainly smirking when they arrived. The dust from the funeral had barely settled, clinging to the air like a ghost. Eleanor, at 67, felt the weight of each of those years pressing down on her shoulders, a physical ache that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the fresh, gaping hole in her life where her husband, Harold, used to be. The black dress she wore still felt alien against her skin, a costume for a play she never wanted to be in. The sympathy cards were stacked on the mantelpiece, a mountain of well-intentioned platitudes that offered no real comfort. The scent of lilies, funereal and cloying, still hung in the living room. It had been 3 days. Just 3 days since she had stood on the hill overlooking their land and watched them lower Harold into the earth he had loved more than anything, more than anyone except for her. And now, this. A gleaming black sedan, so polished it seemed to suck the light out of the gray afternoon, had rolled up her long, gravel driveway. It was an unwelcome intrusion of a world she and Harold had deliberately kept at bay. 2 men emerged. One was Arthur Sterling, the president of the town's most powerful bank, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. He was dressed in a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut glass, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He radiated an aura of expensive cologne and impatient authority. The other man was his lawyer, a silent, grim figure named Graves, who clutched a leather briefcase as if it contained state secrets. Eleanor had watched them from the kitchen window, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. She knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this was not a social call. This was not an expression of condolence. This was a circling vulture. She had met Sterling a few times over the years, at town functions or at the bank itself. He had always been overly solicitous, calling her sweetheart, in a tone that was both patronizing and predatory. Harold had never trusted him. "A man who shines his shoes that much," Harold used to say, "is trying to distract you from the mud on his hands." Eleanor opened the front door before they had a chance to knock. She stood framed in the doorway, her small stature belying the sudden steel that was hardening in her spine. She did not invite them in. "Arthur," she said, her voice quiet but steady. She refused to call him Mr. Sterling. In her world, respect was earned, not conferred by a title. "Eleanor, my dear," Sterling began, his smile a practiced, sympathetic mask. "I am so terribly sorry for your loss. Harold was a fixture in this community." The word hung in the air, cold and impersonal. A fixture, like a lamppost or a park bench, not a man who had laughed and loved and bled on this land for 50 years. "We wanted to come and express our deepest sympathies in person." Eleanor's eyes flickered to the briefcase in Graves's hand. "Did you?" she said. It was not a question. The silence stretched, uncomfortable for them, a shield for her. She was using their own discomfort against them, a tactic Harold had taught her. "Never rush to fill a silence," he'd said. "The person who needs something will always speak first." Sterling's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He cleared his throat. "Well, yes, and there is a small matter of business we need to discuss. I hate to bring it up at a time like this, truly, but the board is insistent." He gestured vaguely, as if appealing to a higher, faceless power. "It's about the loan." The loan! It was a line of credit Harold had taken out 5 years ago. He had needed new equipment for his workshop, and some funds to help his nephew start a small business that had ultimately failed. It was not a massive sum, not in the grand scheme of things, but it was significant for them. They had been paying it down, steadily, diligently. But Harold's final illness had been expensive. The treatments, the hospital stays, the specialized care. It had drained their savings dry. The last 2 payments on the loan had been missed. Eleanor knew this. She had the notices tucked away in a drawer, another source of quiet, gnawing anxiety she had not wanted to burden Harold with in his final days. "I'm aware we are behind," Eleanor said, her chin lifting slightly. "I intend to get it caught up as soon as the estate is settled." Sterling shook his head slowly, a pantomime of regret. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Eleanor. The loan was secured by the property, all 100 acres of it, and given the circumstances and the default on the payments, the bank has decided to call the loan in full. The entire outstanding principal is now due." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Immediately. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Immediately. The word was a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. She felt her breath catch in her throat. The outstanding principal was nearly $70,000. She might as well have tried to conjure it from thin air. She had a few thousand in her account, enough to cover bills for a couple of months, and that was it. Harold's life insurance was a modest policy, just enough to cover his funeral expenses with a little left over. Nothing close to $70,000. I don't have that," she stammered, hating the tremor in her voice. She felt a flush of shame, of failure. She was letting Harold down. Sterling's expression shifted from feigned sympathy to cool professionalism. The mask was off. "We know," he said simply, "which is why we are prepared to offer you a solution. A way out." He glanced at Graves, who stepped forward and opened the briefcase. He produced a sheaf of papers with a crisp, rustling sound. "This is a deed in lieu of foreclosure," Sterling explained, his voice smooth as oil. "You sign the property over to the bank. In return, we forgive the entire debt. You walk away, free and clear. No foreclosure on your credit, no legal battles. It's a clean break." Eleanor stared at the papers, then back at his face. "Sign the property over? This is my home. Harold and I built this house with our own hands. We've lived here for 50 years. And you've had a wonderful 50 years, I'm sure," Sterling said, his tone dismissive. "But things change. The bank has plans for this area. A new development? It's progress, Eleanor. This land, this is prime real estate. Worth a lot more than your outstanding debt, I can assure you. We're actually being quite generous." Generous? The word was a slap in the face. They were trying to steal her home, the repository of her entire life's memories, and they were calling it generosity. The anger, cold and pure, began to burn through the fog of her grief. It was a welcome heat. "And where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. Sterling shrugged, a small, elegant gesture of supreme indifference. "We've made arrangements. There's a lovely senior living apartment complex in the city. Very comfortable. We would even cover your first month's rent, as a gesture of goodwill." He was already picturing the bulldozers. She could see it in his eyes. He was picturing his golf course, his luxury condos, his profits. He was erasing her. "You have 30 days, he said, his voice hardening now. The pretense was over. This was a threat. "Sign the papers now, and it's simple. If not, in 30 days, we will begin formal foreclosure proceedings. It will be messy, public, and expensive for you. And the outcome will be the same. The bank will get the land. The only difference is whether you walk away with a clean slate or a mountain of legal fees and a foreclosure on your record. The choice is yours." He held out a pen. "This is just business, Eleanor. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal. The phrase echoed in the hollow space where her heart had been. He was trying to take everything that was personal to her, everything that mattered, and reduce it to a transaction. She looked past him, up the hill to the single oak tree where Harold lay. She thought of his hands, calloused and strong, shaping the wood for their kitchen cabinets. She thought of his laughter echoing in the workshop. She thought of the promise she had made to him in the quiet, dim hours before he passed. Her gaze dropped to the papers, then to Sterling's smug face. He thought he had her. He saw a grieving, broke, powerless old woman. He saw an easy victory. He did not see Harold's wife. He did not see the keeper of the secrets. She took a deep breath, the cool air steadying her. "I'll need some time to think," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside her. 30 days, you said?" Sterling's smile returned, triumphant this time. He believed she was just delaying the inevitable. 30 days, he confirmed, withdrawing the pen. "But I wouldn't wait too long, Eleanor. The offer is on the table now. Don't let pride get in the way of a sensible decision." He and Graves turned and walked back to their gleaming black car, their posture radiating victory. Eleanor stood in the doorway and watched them drive away, the gravel crunching under their tires. The dust they kicked up settled slowly back onto the land. 30 days. They had given her 30 days to surrender. A cold, determined calm washed over her. She turned and walked back into her house, her steps sure and steady. They thought they were giving her a deadline. They had no idea they were giving her a head start. He was right about one thing. It wasn't personal. It was going to be a business transaction, but it was going to be her business, on her terms. She walked over to the old roll-top desk in the corner of the living room, the one that had been Harold's. She ran a hand over the smooth, worn wood. 30 days to save her home. She wouldn't need that long. She was ready now. She was ready in 7. The house felt cavernously empty after the black sedan disappeared down the lane. The silence, once a comfort, was now a heavy blanket threatening to smother her. For a long moment, Eleanor simply stood in the center of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself. The bravado she had shown at the door evaporated, leaving behind the raw, jagged edges of grief and a terrifying, bone-deep fear. $70,000. It might as well have been $1 million. They had lived a simple life, a rich life, but not a wealthy one. Their wealth was in the sunrises over the eastern ridge, the taste of vegetables from their own garden, the solid feel of the house Harold had built around them like a protective shell. It was a currency the bank did not recognize. She sank onto the worn floral sofa, the cushions sighing as they took her weight. She could smell Harold's scent on the fabric, a faint mix of sawdust, pipe tobacco, and the earth itself. The tears she had held back in front of Sterling now came, hot and silent. They weren't just tears for Harold. They were tears of rage, of helplessness, of a profound and soul-crushing injustice. How could they be so cruel? To come to her home, her sanctuary of grief, and threaten her with homelessness? To speak of progress as they planned to bulldoze her memories? She cried for what felt like an hour, letting the sorrow wash through her. She cried until her head throbbed and her eyes were raw. And then, something shifted. It was a subtle change, like the turn of a tide deep beneath the surface. The grief was still there, a permanent resident in the house of her heart, but a new feeling was laying claim to the empty rooms. It was anger, a cold, clean, clarifying anger. It was the anger of a cornered animal, the fury of a queen whose kingdom was under siege. It burned away the fog of despair and left a sharp, focused point of light in its place. She thought of Harold's last weeks. He had been lucid, even as his body failed him. His mind, always so sharp and inquisitive, had remained clear. They had spent hours talking, not about the end, but about the future. Her future. Ellie, he had whispered, his voice a dry rasp, his hand gripping hers with surprising strength. You listen to me. Everything you need is here. Don't you let anyone tell you this land is just dirt and rock. Don't you ever believe that? At the time, she had thought he was being poetic, speaking of the sentimental value, the 50 years of life they had poured into the soil. She had squeezed his hand and promised. I won't, Harold. I promise. No, you really listen, he had insisted, his eyes boring into hers. The ledger, in the desk, you know the one. It's not just a hobby, Ellie, it's a map. It's a key. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. You're smarter than any of them. You see things they don't. You always have. He had coughed then, a racking sound that tore at her heart, and the moment had passed. But she had never forgotten his intensity, the desperate urgency in his eyes. The ledger. Now, his words came back to her not as the ramblings of a dying man, but as a direct, explicit instruction, a posthumous battle plan. She stood up, her movements stiff but purposeful. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and walked to the roll-top desk. It was a beautiful piece of furniture, made of dark oak, filled with cubbyholes and small drawers. It had been Harold's command center, the place where he kept his records, his books, his correspondence. With a deep breath, she rolled back the curved top. The familiar scent of old paper and wood polish filled the air. And there it was, right in the center, exactly where he always kept it. It was a thick, leather-bound ledger, the kind accountants used 100 years ago. The dark brown leather was worn smooth at the edges, cracked and faded with time. There was no title on the cover. To anyone else, it would look like an old, forgotten account book. But Eleanor knew better. This was Harold's life's work. For over 40 years, ever since he first inherited this land from his father, Harold had been obsessed with what lay beneath it. He wasn't a formally trained geologist, but he had the mind and the soul of one. He had read every book he could find, corresponded with professors, and spent thousands of hours walking every inch of their 100 acres. He had a theory. The local wisdom was that their land was nothing but granite and scrub. It was beautiful, but commercially useless. That's why his father had been able to buy it so cheap back in the 40s. But Harold had noticed things. The strange, discolored veins in the rock outcroppings on the western ridge. The unusual weight of certain stones he found in the creek bed. The way the water from their well had a faint, almost unnoticeable mineral taste that was different from the water on neighboring properties. She opened the ledger. The pages were filled with Harold's neat, precise script. It was a language only she could fully understand, a mix of geological terms, hand-drawn maps, chemical formulas, and personal notes. Page after page of data. Core sample 14B, depth 50 feet, pegmatite intrusion, high concentration of spodumene. Note the greenish tint. Cross-reference with USGS survey map from 1968. Anomaly aligns with magnetic field deviation. Technical Bulletin 47 from the Bureau of Mines. Must reread section on lithium-bearing pegmatites. It had been his secret passion. He rarely spoke of it to others, who would have dismissed him as an eccentric old crank. But he had shared it all with her. In the evenings, he would lay his maps out on the kitchen table, his face alive with excitement, and explain his findings. She had listened, sometimes only half understanding the technical details, but always fully understanding the passion, the dedication, the dream. He believed there was something valuable under their feet. something the world was just starting to need. She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing his familiar handwriting. It was all here, decades of painstaking research. He had logged the location and depth of every hole he had drilled with his small, second-hand core sampler. He had cataloged the mineral content of each sample. He had drawn detailed geological maps that put the official county surveys to shame. Towards the back of the book, the entries became more urgent. The notes were from the last few years, right around the time he took out the bank loan. "The assays from the lab confirm it," one entry read. "The concentration is higher than I ever dared to hope. Commercial grade, world class even." Another entry, dated just 6 months before his diagnosis. "Talked to Professor Albright at the university again. He said, if my data is accurate, this could be one of the most significant deposits in North America. He urged me to go public, to file a claim. But I can't. Not yet. The world isn't ready, and neither are we. What would we do with that kind of money, Ellie? It would ruin us. It would ruin this place." And then, the final entry, written in a shaky hand just a month before he died. "Sterling's bank is sniffing around again. He asked about the land at the post office, played it off as idle curiosity. He's a shark. He smells something, even if he doesn't know what it is. I have to protect Ellie. The loan is the weak point. If I'm gone, they will come for her. They will come for the land. She has to be ready. The ledger is the shield. The bulletin is the sword. She'll know. The bulletin is the sword." Eleanor's eyes darted to a small, cluttered drawer in the desk. She pulled it open. Under a pile of old receipts and spare keys was a slim, faded booklet. It was a government publication, its cover a dull, bureaucratic gray. "United States Bureau of Mines," the title read. "Technical Bulletin 47, Identification and Analysis of Rare Earth Element-Bearing Minerals in Pegmatite Formations." It looked mind-numbingly boring. She remembered Harold treating it like a holy text. He had dog-eared pages and underlined passages in red ink. She pulled it out, her hands trembling slightly. She was not a geologist. She was a gardener, a baker, a wife. But she was also a quick study, and she was Harold Vance's wife. He had trusted her. He had believed in her. He had left her not just a home, but an arsenal. The grief was still there, a deep, resonant ache. But the fear was gone, burned away by the cold fire of Harold's legacy and her own rising fury. She closed the ledger and placed the bulletin on top of it. She looked at the phone on the wall. Her first instinct was to call her best friend, Sarah, and unload everything. But she stopped. Not yet. Harold had been a man of quiet planning and meticulous execution. She needed to be the same. First, she needed to understand exactly what she had. Then, she needed a professional, not just any lawyer. She needed a shark of her own, a shark who hunted other sharks. She went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee, her movements efficient and automatic. As the coffee brewed, she pulled out a notepad and a pen. At the top of the page, she wrote, "The plan." Underneath it, she wrote 2 words, "Step 1, understand." She sat down at the kitchen table, the ledger and the bulletin in front of her. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passage of time. 30 days, 29 now. The countdown had begun, but it was not her countdown, it was theirs. The first 2 days were a blur of caffeine and concentration. Eleanor barely slept. She lived at the kitchen table, surrounded by Harold's life's work. She read the ledger from cover to cover, then read it again. She didn't just read the words, she absorbed them. She forced herself to understand the terminology, looking up words like spodumene, lepidolite, and tantalite in Harold's old geology textbooks. She studied his hand-drawn maps, comparing them to the topographical charts of the county she found in his desk. Slowly, painstakingly, the picture began to emerge from the dense thicket of data. Harold hadn't just found a small pocket of interesting minerals. He had systematically mapped out a massive, interconnected series of pegmatite dikes, veins of igneous rock that had crystallized from molten magma deep within the earth. And these weren't just any pegmatites. They were, as his notes confirmed again and again, incredibly rich in two things: lithium and a host of other elements the world was suddenly desperate for, the so-called rare earth elements, the things that powered cell phones, electric cars, and advanced defense systems. She then turned her attention to Technical Bulletin 47. At first, it was nearly incomprehensible, a dense forest of scientific jargon. But as she cross-referenced it with Harold's notes, it began to make a terrifying kind of sense. Harold had used the bulletin as a guide, a Rosetta Stone, to unlock the secrets of their land. The passages he had underlined were not random. They were specific analytical methods, descriptions of geological formations that exactly matched his own core samples, and, most importantly, a section on estimating the potential yield and market value of such a deposit. Harold had done the math himself in the margins. His calculations, based on the prices from a few years ago, were staggering. Even then, he had estimated the value of the minerals under their feet to be in the tens of millions of dollars. Eleanor's hands shook as she read his neat conservative figures. Tens of millions. And Sterling was trying to steal it all for a $70,000 debt. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it left her breathless. The anger returned, hotter and sharper this time. It wasn't just a home they were trying to take. It was a kingdom. On the morning of the third day, she knew she had gone as far as she could on her own. She had the what. Now she needed the how. How to prove it. How to leverage it. How to turn Harold's shield and sword into an actual weapon. She picked up the phone and dialed the number for her best friend, Sarah Jenkins. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice warm and full of concern. "Ellie, I was just about to call you. How are you holding up, honey?" "I'm holding," Eleanor said, and was surprised to find that it was true. "Sarah, I need your help. Not for sympathy, for a fight." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Sarah's tone changed. The soft warmth was replaced by a familiar, flinty edge. Sarah was a retired nurse, a woman who had seen it all and was intimidated by nothing. "You tell me who, and you tell me where," she said simply. Eleanor explained everything: the visit from Sterling, the 30-day ultimatum, the ledger, the bulletin. She laid it all out, her voice calm and measured. When she finished, there was a long, charged silence. "That silver-haired son of a snake," Sarah finally hissed. "I never liked him. He always looked like he was about to foreclose on an orphanage. So, what's the plan?" "I need a lawyer," Eleanor said. "Not the local guy who handles wills and property disputes. I need someone from the city. Someone who understands corporate finance and mining rights. Someone who won't be intimidated by Arthur Sterling and his small-town kingdom. I need the best." "My niece, Jessica," Sarah said immediately. "She's a lawyer in the city, a real barracuda, in the best possible way. Works for one of those big, fancy firms with names that sound like a law library. She specializes in corporate litigation. She eats men like Arthur Sterling for breakfast and picks her teeth with their tie clips. Let me make a call." 2 hours later, Eleanor was on the phone with Jessica Albright. Jessica had a voice that was crisp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of sentimentality. Eleanor liked her immediately. She listened without interruption as Eleanor once again recounted the story, this time focusing on the legal and financial details. "Mr. Sterling gave you a deed in lieu of foreclosure offer?" Jessica asked when Eleanor had finished. "Yes, he said it was a clean break," Eleanor replied. Jessica made a sound that was something between a laugh and a snort. "It's a predator's move, Mrs. Vance. It's what lenders do when they know the collateral is worth far more than the debt. They scare the debtor into signing away the asset to avoid a messy foreclosure, and they walk away with a massive profit. The fact that he came to your home personally, just days after your husband's passing, that tells me he's not just confident. He's desperate." "Desperate?" Eleanor asked. "He's the president of the most successful bank in the county." "On the surface, perhaps," Jessica said, her voice thoughtful. "Let me do some digging into Sterling Mutual Bank's financials. Publicly traded companies have to file all sorts of disclosures. People like Mr. Sterling are very good at making things look rosy, but the numbers don't lie. In the meantime, I want to see this ledger and this bulletin. Can you have them scanned and emailed to me?" "I can do better than that," Eleanor said. "I'll bring them to you tomorrow." The next day, Sarah drove her into the city. Eleanor clutched a worn canvas tote bag on her lap. The ledger and the bulletin nestled safely inside. The law firm of Albright, Chen, and Porter was on the 40th floor of a gleaming glass and steel tower that scraped the sky. The lobby was a symphony of marble, dark wood, and hushed efficiency. It was a world away from her quiet life, and for a moment, she felt a pang of intimidation. But then she thought of Harold, and she thought of Sterling's smug face, and her resolve hardened. Jessica Albright was younger than Eleanor had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of coiled energy. She led them into a conference room with a panoramic view of the city. Eleanor ignored the view. She took out the ledger and the bulletin and laid them on the massive mahogany table. They looked small and humble in this temple of modern commerce. Jessica spent the next hour poring over the documents. She didn't just skim them. She studied them, her brow furrowed in concentration. She asked sharp, pointed questions. "This core sample log, is it complete? Are the locations clearly marked on his maps? This Technical Bulletin 47, it's an obscure publication. How did your husband know it was so significant?" Eleanor answered every question clearly and concisely, her memory for Harold's work proving to be photographic. Finally, Jessica sat back in her chair and looked at Eleanor, a new respect in her eyes. "Mrs. Vance," she said slowly, "if what your husband has documented here is even 50% accurate, you are not in danger of losing your home. You are, in fact, one of the wealthiest women in the state. You just don't know it yet." The words hung in the air. One of the wealthiest women in the state. It was too much to comprehend. It felt unreal, like a line from a movie. "But we have to be smart about this," Jessica continued, her voice all business now. "Sterling has given us a gift, a 30-day clock. He thinks it's his clock, ticking down to his victory. We're going to make it our clock, ticking down to his ruin. Here's what we need to do. First, we need independent verification. Your husband's work is meticulous, but a court or a bank will dismiss it as the work of an amateur. We need a certified geological survey and an official assay of the mineral content. I know a firm, the best in the country. It will be expensive." "Harold left a small life insurance policy," Eleanor said quietly. "It was meant for me to live on, but I think he would agree this is a better use for it." She had made her decision on the drive into the city. She was betting everything on Harold. "Good," Jessica said, nodding. "Second, I'm going to do a deep dive on Sterling and his bank. My gut tells me there's a story there, a reason for his desperation. And third, and this is the most important part, you must do nothing. You must not contact him. If he contacts you, you will be polite, non-committal, and say you are considering his offer with your family. You will let him believe you are weak, scared, and rudderless. You will let him walk right into the trap. Can you do that? Eleanor looked at the ledger on the table, the testament to her husband's love and foresight. She thought of his final, urgent words. She'll know. She looked at Jessica, this sharp, brilliant young woman who was her new general. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. I can do that. The next week was a whirlwind of controlled, clandestine activity. Eleanor felt a surge of energy she hadn't felt in years. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but now it was fuel. She was no longer just a widow. She was an executor of Harold's final, brilliant plan. The geological survey company Jessica hired was discreet and efficient. 2 men in a plain white van with no markings arrived at her property. They were polite, professional, and spoke in quiet, technical terms. They introduced themselves as Dr. Evans and his assistant. They had brought with them sophisticated equipment, ground-penetrating radar, a portable core drill far more advanced than Harold's, and sealed containers for the samples. Eleanor gave them Harold's ledger. Dr. Evans, a man with a kind face and eyes that lit up with scientific curiosity, treated the old book with a reverence that touched Eleanor deeply. Your husband was a remarkable man, Mrs. Vance, he said after studying the maps and logs for an hour. This is not the work of an amateur. This is the work of a visionary. He saw what everyone else missed. He did 90% of our work for us. We're just here to verify it with modern equipment. For 3 days, they worked on the western ridge, the part of the property Harold had identified as the heart of the deposit. They drilled new core samples, carefully logging the locations and depths, confirming Harold's findings at every turn. Eleanor would bring them coffee and sandwiches, watching from a distance. It was strange to see other men working on Harold's land, but it also felt right. This was the culmination of his dream. Meanwhile, Jessica was conducting her own investigation from the city. She called Eleanor every evening with an update. I've got his financials, Ellie, she said on the second night, the use of Eleanor's first name a sign of their growing rapport. Sterling Mutual Bank is in trouble. Deep trouble. About 2 years ago, Sterling sunk a huge portion of the bank's capital into a speculative commercial real estate venture in another state. It went bust. He's been hiding the losses through some very creative accounting, but the regulators are starting to sniff around. He's facing a major audit at the end of next month. He's not just over-leveraged, he's on the verge of insolvency. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. So he needs an asset, Eleanor said, her mind racing. A big one. Something he can put on the books to cover the hole. Exactly, Jessica confirmed. And he needs it fast. He can't afford a long, drawn-out foreclosure. He needs you to sign that deed. He's not just trying to make a profit. Ellie. He's trying to save himself from ruin and probably a prison sentence. And it gets worse. I found something else. A preliminary environmental impact study that was commissioned by a development company a year ago for the land adjacent to yours. It was shelved, but I got a copy. It mentions unusual subterranean geological formations on the edge of your property and recommends further study. Sterling was on the board of that development company. He saw that report. He didn't know exactly what you had, but he knew it was something. He knew the land was worth more than just timber and rock. That's when he started putting the squeeze on Harold with the loan. The cold fury washed over Eleanor again. It wasn't just opportunistic greed. It was a calculated, predatory campaign. He had seen Harold's financial vulnerability as an opening and had been waiting for the moment to strike. He had used their friendship, their community ties, as a cover for his scheme. On the 5th day, Dr. Evans and his team finished their work. He came to the house, his face serious. "Mrs. Vance," he said, "we've sent the core samples to the lab for a full assay. We'll have the official certified results in a couple of days. But I can tell you now, from my own field analysis, your husband was not only correct, he was conservative. The deposit is larger and richer than his estimates. The concentration of high-purity lithium is extraordinary, and the presence of other rare earth elements, particularly neodymium and terbium, is off the charts. This isn't just a significant find, it's a strategic one. There are governments that would go to war over a deposit like this." Eleanor felt a wave of dizziness. Strategic. Governments. War. This was so much bigger than she had ever imagined. She steadied herself against the kitchen counter. "What does it mean, Dr. Evans?" In simple terms. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of awe and gravity. "It means, Mrs. Vance, that you effectively own a private Fort Knox. The value is astronomical. I can't even give you a firm number until the assays are back, but it will have 9 zeros in it, at least." 9 zeros. $1 billion. The number was meaningless. It was an abstraction. What was real was the land, the house, the memory of Harold. What was real was the threat from Arthur Sterling. That evening, just as she was sitting down with a cup of tea, the phone rang. It was him. Her heart leapt into her throat, but she took a calming breath and answered, just as Jessica had instructed. "Eleanor, my dear, it's Arthur Sterling," he said, his voice oozing a false charm that now made her skin crawl. "I was just calling to see how you were doing, and to see if you'd had a chance to think about our generous offer. The clock is ticking, you know." She clutched the receiver, her knuckles white. She could feel the anger, the righteous fury bubbling up inside her. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him she knew everything, but she saw Jessica's face in her mind's eye. Let him walk into the trap. "Hello, Arthur," she said, forcing her voice to sound tired and uncertain. "Yes, I've been thinking. It's all so much to take in." "Of course it is, of course," he said soothingly. "It's a big decision, but it's the right one, Eleanor, the sensible one. Let us take this burden off your shoulders. Just sign the papers. We can have it all settled by the end of the week." "I'm talking it over with my family," she said, using the exact phrase Jessica had given her. There was a slight pause. "Family?" Sterling asked, a new sharpness in his tone. "I wasn't aware you had much family nearby." "My niece," she improvised, thinking of Sarah's niece, Jessica. "She's helping me look at my options." Sterling recovered quickly, his smooth tone returning. "Well, that's fine, but don't let some out-of-town lawyer fill your head with nonsense about fighting us. I've seen it 100 times. They'll just run up a huge bill, and in the end, the result is the same. The bank gets the land. This is the best deal you're going to get. Don't take it personally, it's just the way business works." That phrase again. That condescending, dismissive phrase. It was the final provocation she needed. It solidified her resolve into something as hard and unbreakable as the granite on her land. "I understand, Arthur," she said, her voice a whisper of feigned submission. "I'll have a decision for you soon." She hung up the phone, her hand steady. The trap was set. The bait was taken. He thought she was consulting a small-time family lawyer. He thought he was winning. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was about to give way. The 7th day dawned, bright and clear. It was a beautiful autumn morning. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the maple trees were a riot of red and gold. It felt like a day for new beginnings. At 9 a.m., an email arrived from Jessica. It contained a single attachment, a PDF file with the letterhead of the Geological Survey Company. It was the official, certified assay report. Eleanor opened it, her heart pounding. The report was 30 pages long, filled with charts, graphs, and technical data. But she skipped to the final page, the executive summary. She read the words, and then she read them again, her eyes wide with disbelief. Dr. Evans had not been exaggerating. The estimated, verifiable, market rate value of the mineral deposits on the 100-acre property, known as the Vance Farm, was not in the tens of millions. It was not even in the hundreds of millions. The conservative estimate, based on current commodity prices, was just over $900 million, with potential for more. She printed the report. Then she called Jessica. "I have it," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I know. I got a copy too." Jessica's voice was electric with excitement. "It's even better than we hoped. The trap isn't just set, Ellie. It's a fortress. It's time to schedule the meeting. I'll call Sterling's office. I'll tell him you're ready to sign the papers. He'll want to do it at the bank. He'll want an audience. He'll want to gloat." "Let him," Eleanor said, a slow, cold smile spreading across her face. "Let him have his audience. Let them all watch." She looked out the window at the land. Her land. Harold's land. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, burning off the morning mist. It was a beautiful day for a reckoning. The meeting was set for 2 days later, on the 10th day after Sterling's visit. Just as Jessica predicted, Sterling insisted it be held in the bank's main boardroom. He wanted to make a show of it. His message, delivered through his secretary, was that the entire bank board would be present to witness the amicable resolution. Amicable. The word was a dark joke. He wasn't just taking her land. He was staging a public execution of her life, and he wanted his cronies there to applaud. The 2 days of waiting were the longest of Eleanor's life. She moved through her house in a state of suspended animation. She watered her plants. She tidied rooms that were already spotless. She sat for long periods in Harold's workshop, running her hand over his tools, breathing in the familiar scent of wood and oil. She was not afraid. The fear had been burned out of her. What she felt now was a profound and heavy sense of purpose. She was the vessel of Harold's legacy, the instrument of a justice that had been 50 years in the making. She spoke with Jessica several times a day, finalizing the strategy. They went over every detail, every possible contingency. Jessica would be there, along with Dr. Evans, the geologist. They would let Sterling lead. They would let him dig his own grave. On the morning of the meeting, Eleanor woke before dawn. She dressed carefully, not in the black of a grieving widow, but in a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It was a color that spoke of quiet confidence, not vulnerability. She put on the small pearl necklace Harold had given her for their 40th anniversary. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the shattered, heartbroken widow of 10 days ago. Her eyes were clear. Her expression was calm. There were still lines of grief etched around her mouth, but now they were framed by a new, unyielding strength. She looked like a woman who knew her own worth. Sarah arrived to drive her to the city, her face a mask of grim determination. "Ready to go into battle, General?" she asked, giving Eleanor's hand a squeeze. "I'm ready," Eleanor said. She picked up her canvas tote bag. It contained only 3 items: Harold's worn leather ledger, the faded copy of Technical Bulletin 47, and the crisp, newly printed 30-page geological survey and assay report. Her shield, her sword, and her cannon. The Sterling Mutual Bank building was the most imposing structure in the county, a monument of granite and glass designed to project power and permanence. As Eleanor and Sarah walked up the steps, Eleanor felt a flicker of the old intimidation, but it vanished as soon as it appeared. This building was a facade. a hollow shell. She knew its secret weakness. She was its weakness. They were met in the lobby by Sterling's grim-faced lawyer, Graves, who escorted them to the elevators without a word. The boardroom was on the top floor. It was a vast, intimidating space, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the city skyline like a dark mirror. Seated around the table were a dozen men in expensive suits, the bank's board of directors. They all had the same look of complacent, well-fed authority. At the head of the table sat Arthur Sterling, beaming like a king holding court. He stood as Eleanor entered, his smile wide and magnanimous. "Eleanor, welcome, welcome," he boomed, gesturing to the empty chair directly across from him. It was a deliberate power play, positioning her as a supplicant before his throne. "I'm so glad you came to your senses. This is the best for everyone, truly." Eleanor walked calmly to the chair, but did not sit. She remained standing, a small, resolute figure in the cavernous room. "Before we begin, Arthur," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "my advisors will be joining us." Sterling's smile tightened. "Advisors?" As if on cue, the boardroom door opened and Jessica Albright walked in, followed by Dr. Evans. Jessica was the picture of corporate power, her suit sharp, her briefcase expensive, her expression unreadable. Dr. Evans, in a tweed jacket and carrying his own worn leather satchel, looked more like a university professor, which only made him seem more authoritative. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The smug satisfaction on the board members' faces was replaced by looks of confusion and faint alarm. This was not the scenario they had been expecting. Sterling's face clouded over. "Who are these people?" he demanded. "This is my legal counsel, Jessica Albright," Eleanor said calmly. "And this is Dr. Robert Evans, a consulting geologist." Jessica stepped forward and handed her business card to Sterling. He glanced at it, and Eleanor saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes as he read the name of the prestigious city law firm. "There's no need for lawyers, Mrs. Vance," he sputtered, trying to regain control. "This is a simple transaction." "My client disagrees," Jessica said, her voice as cold and hard as the marble in the lobby. "Please, let's all have a seat. We have a great deal to discuss." They all sat. The air was thick with tension. Sterling, visibly rattled, tried to stick to his script. "Very well," he said, shuffling some papers in front of him. "We are here to finalize the deed in lieu of foreclosure for the property at 1450 Ridge Road, owned by the late Harold Vance and his widow, Eleanor Vance. The bank has generously agreed to forgive the outstanding debt of $71,428.62 in exchange for the title to the 100 acres of land. Mrs. Vance, do you have the signed papers?" Eleanor looked at him, her expression unblinking. "No," she said. A murmur went around the table. Sterling's face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this? We had an agreement. You have no other options. In 20 days, this property goes into foreclosure, and you will get nothing." "That's where you're mistaken, Arthur," Eleanor said, her voice still quiet, but now with an edge of pure steel. "I do have another option. I'm here today to pay off my husband's loan, in full." The room fell silent. Sterling stared at her, dumbfounded. "Pay it off? With what? I've seen your bank accounts, Eleanor. You can't afford to pay the interest, let alone the principal." "That is my client's private financial business," Jessica interjected smoothly. "But rest assured, the funds are available. We are prepared to wire the full amount today. However, we are not here to discuss the loan." "Then what are you here for?" one of the board members asked, his voice laced with irritation. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "We're here to discuss the collateral," she said. "We're here to discuss the land. You see, you seem to be under the impression that you are foreclosing on 100 acres of worthless rock and dirt. You think it's worth, what? Maybe a few $100,000 for development? You called it prime real estate." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. She had their complete, undivided attention. "My husband, Harold, spent 50 years studying that land. You all dismissed him as an eccentric old man who liked to collect rocks. You thought his workshop was a hobby. You were wrong." She reached into her tote bag and pulled out the old leather ledger. She placed it on the table with a soft thud. "This was his life's work," she said. "A complete geological survey of the property. For decades, he suspected there was something special about our land. And he was right." She then looked at Dr. Evans. "Doctor, would you care to elaborate?" Dr. Evans opened his satchel and took out the bound assay report. He stood up and addressed the board as if they were a classroom of slow students. "Good morning, gentlemen. For the past week, my firm has been conducting a thorough geological survey of the Vance property, confirming and expanding upon the extensive data collected by the late Mr. Harold Vance." He opened the report. "To summarize a great deal of technical data, the Vance property does not sit on worthless granite. It sits atop one of the richest, most concentrated deposits of lithium-bearing pegmatite discovered in North America in the last 50 years. The quality of the spodumene is exceptionally high, making it ideal for the production of battery-grade lithium carbonate." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Board members were leaning forward, staring at Dr. Evans, their faces paling. Sterling looked as if he had been punched in the gut. "But that's not all," Dr. Evans continued, his voice calm and academic. "The deposit is also unusually rich in several key rare earth elements, most notably neodymium and terbium, which are critical components for high-strength magnets used in everything from electric vehicles to wind turbines and military guidance systems." He paused, looking around the table at the stunned faces. He let the silence stretch for a moment before delivering the final devastating blow. "My firm was contracted to provide a certified valuation of these mineral assets based on current market commodity prices. While further exploration will be needed to determine the absolute full extent of the deposit, we can confidently state, based on our core samples and analysis, that the verifiable conservative estimated value of the mineral deposits located on this property is approximately $900 million. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the room. It was the sound of a dozen jaws dropping in unison. It was the sound of fortunes being lost and made in a single sentence. It was the sound of an entire reality collapsing. The board members stared, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and incandescent greed. They looked from Dr. Evans to Eleanor, this small, quiet woman they had dismissed, and saw her not as a victim, but as the gatekeeper to an unimaginable fortune. Sterling's face had gone from red to a ghastly, waxy white. This is absurd," he stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. "A trick. You faked this report. You can't. It's not possible." "The report is certified and has been filed with the State Geological Survey Office as of this morning," Jessica said coolly. "It is a legal, binding document, and we have copies of your bank's own internal reports, Mr. Sterling, including the one from the development company you sat on the board of, the one that mentioned unusual subterranean geological formations and recommended further study, a report you buried, a report that proves you had a fiduciary duty to investigate the true value of the collateral before attempting to seize it for a fraction of its worth. That, gentlemen, is called bank fraud." That was the kill shot. The word fraud sucked all the remaining air out of the room. The board members, who had been looking at Sterling with confusion, now turned on him with expressions of pure fury and betrayal. They weren't just losing a potential windfall. They were now implicated in a massive financial crime. Sterling shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor. You planned this! You manipulated me!" Eleanor looked at him, her gaze level and cold. All the years of his condescension, his patronizing smiles, his predatory intentions, coalesced into a single, perfect moment of retribution. She leaned forward and spoke, her voice still quiet, but now it cut through the room like a shard of glass. "This is just business, Arthur," she said. "It's nothing personal." The callback, the perfect inversion of his own cruel words, landed with the force of a physical blow. Sterling staggered back as if he'd been struck. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face, a mask of rage and disbelief, crumpled. He was broken. Utterly and completely broken, in front of the very people he had sought to impress. Jessica stood up. "Gentlemen," she said, addressing the stunned board, "my client is now the majority shareholder of this land's value, which, as you now know, makes her an entity of significant financial interest to this entire region. We will be paying off the loan today, and then we will be discussing the future. I suggest you start by removing Mr. Sterling from this room and from his position before the federal regulators arrive. I believe they have an appointment this afternoon." Chaos erupted. Two of the board members, their faces grim, stood and moved towards Sterling, who had collapsed into his chair, muttering to himself. Another was on his phone, presumably calling security. The illusion of power had shattered, leaving behind only panic and a desperate scramble for self-preservation. Eleanor stood up. She had not raised her voice. She had not gloated. She had simply stated the truth. She looked around the room at the wreckage of Arthur Sterling's career, at the panicked faces of the men who had been ready to watch her be thrown out of her home. She felt no triumph, only a quiet, profound sense of justice. Harold's justice. She collected the ledger and the bulletin, leaving the assay report on the table like a bomb that had already detonated. She turned and walked towards the door, her steps confident and light. Jessica fell into step beside her. As they reached the door, one of the board members, a man who hadn't said a word the entire time, called out, his voice shaky. "Mrs. Vance." Eleanor paused and looked back. What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice a mixture of fear and awe. Eleanor gave him a small, enigmatic smile. "I'm going home," she said, and with that, she walked out of the room, leaving the ruins of Sterling's empire behind her. The battle was over. She had won. The walk out of the bank was surreal. The world that had seemed so intimidating on the way in now felt small and insignificant. The hushed efficiency of the lobby, the towering marble columns, it all seemed like a stage set for a play that had just ended. Graves, the silent lawyer, was nowhere to be seen. He had likely vanished the moment the word fraud was spoken, a rat deserting a sinking ship. Sarah was waiting for them by the elevators, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. She rushed to Eleanor and wrapped her in a fierce hug. "Oh, Ellie," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it. Harold would be so damn proud." Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes, but she blinked them back. "He did it, Sarah," she corrected quietly. "I just read the map he left me." Jessica joined them, a rare, genuine smile on her face. "That was the most satisfying meeting of my entire career," she said, shaking her head in admiration. "They didn't know what hit them. You were magnificent, Eleanor." As they rode the elevator down in silence, Eleanor felt the tension of the last 10 days begin to drain out of her. leaving a profound sense of peace in its wake. It was the quiet after a storm. When they stepped out into the bright sunlight of the city street, it felt like stepping into a different world, a different life. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Arthur Sterling. Just as Jessica had predicted, the board turned on him to save themselves. He was fired before Eleanor had even made it back to her own driveway. Federal investigators, alerted by a confidential tip from Jessica's firm, swarmed the bank the next day. The creative accounting, the hidden losses, the buried geological report, it all came to light. Sterling was arrested and charged with multiple counts of bank fraud, wire fraud, and securities violations. His assets were frozen. His reputation was obliterated overnight. The story became a local legend, a cautionary tale about the silver-haired shark who tried to swallow a whale and was devoured instead. For Eleanor, the days that followed were a strange mix of quiet reflection and momentous decisions. Her phone rang constantly. Investment bankers, mining corporations, wealth managers, and distant relatives she hadn't heard from in years all came calling, drawn by the scent of her $900 million fortune. She let Jessica handle all of it, instructing her to turn them all away. She had no interest in becoming a mining magnate. She had no desire for a life of glittering excess. That was Sterling's dream, not hers. Her dream was the same as it had always been, a quiet life on the land she loved. But she knew things could not stay the same. Harold had not left her this incredible gift for her to simply sit on it. He had left it to empower her, to protect her, and to create a legacy. A week after the boardroom showdown, she sat down with Jessica and Sarah at her own kitchen table. The polished mahogany of the boardroom was replaced by the familiar scarred pine of her own table. "I know what I want to do," Eleanor announced, her voice firm. She laid out her plan. She would not sell the land. She would not allow some massive, soulless corporation to come in and tear it apart for profit. Instead, she would form a trust, the Vance Land and Legacy Trust. The trust would retain ownership of the land and its mineral rights. She would then partner with a carefully selected ethical mining company, one with a proven track record of environmental responsibility, to extract the minerals in the least invasive way possible. A significant portion of the profits would be funneled directly into a new charitable foundation, the Harold Vance Foundation, she said, her voice catching slightly. It will have two missions. First, it will fund scholarships for promising geology students at universities across the country, especially for those from humble backgrounds, like Harold was. It will support the dreamers, the ones who see more than just dirt and rock. She paused, taking a sip of tea. Second, it will be dedicated to revitalizing this town and this county. We'll build a new wing for the library. We'll create a fund to provide low-interest loans for local small businesses, the kind of helping hand Harold always tried to offer. We'll upgrade the equipment at the local clinic. We will use this wealth to build community, not to build condos. Jessica and Sarah stared at her, their expressions full of awe. "Ellie, it's brilliant," Sarah said softly. "It's exactly what he would have wanted." "It is," Eleanor agreed. He didn't want the money for himself. He feared it, but he knew it could be a tool to protect and a tool to build. I'm just going to be the one to wield it. As a final act of quiet grace, Eleanor instructed Jessica to set up a small, anonymous fund within the bank's restructuring plan. It was designed to ensure that the rank-and-file employees of Sterling Mutual, the tellers and clerks who had done nothing wrong, would not lose their pensions or their jobs because of Sterling's crimes. It was a small act of compassion, a detail that separated her brand of justice from his brand of greed. That evening, as she was cleaning out a drawer in Harold's desk to make room for the new trust documents, Her fingers brushed against a loose panel at the back. Curious, she pried it open. Tucked inside was a single, sealed envelope. On the front, in Harold's familiar script, was one word: Eleanor. Her heart clenched. It was a letter from beyond the grave. With trembling hands, she opened it. My dearest Ellie, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means the sharks have come, and you have met them. I hope I left you everything you needed. I am not sorry for the secret, only for the burden it may have placed on you. I never wanted the money, my love. I only ever wanted you, and this life, this land. But I saw the way the world was changing. I saw men like Sterling, and I knew our quiet life was fragile. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you vulnerable. This knowledge, this land, it was the only armor I could give you. Don't let it change who you are. Use it as a shield to protect what we built and as a tool to help others. Build things, Ellie. Grow things. That's what we were always best at. Know that I loved you more than all the lithium in the ground, more than all the stars in the sky. Know that my last thought was of you, standing strong on our hill. Be happy. You've earned it. All my love, forever, Harold. The tears came then, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of love, of gratitude, of a profound and beautiful closure. She folded the letter and held it to her heart. He had known. He had trusted her completely. She was not just the keeper of his legacy. She was the fulfillment of his love. A year passed. The world changed. And yet, in the ways that mattered, Eleanor's world remained the same. The Vance Land and Legacy Trust was a model of responsible industry. The mining operation was small-scale and meticulous, respecting the landscape. The Harold Vance Foundation became a powerful force for good. The first class of Vance scholars was announced, and the town library broke ground on its new, state-of-the-art wing. The name Vance, once associated with a quiet, eccentric farmer, was now synonymous with integrity and generosity. Eleanor remained in her house, the house Harold had built. It was still her sanctuary, but it was no longer a house of grief. It was a house of purpose. She still tended her garden. She still baked bread. But now, she also sat on the board of her foundation, reviewing scholarship applications and town improvement projects, her mind as sharp and focused as any CEO's. She had found a new rhythm, a new way of being. One afternoon, a man came to her door. He was not a banker or a lawyer. He was a local historian named David Chen, a gentleman in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He was writing a book about the history of the county and wanted to talk to her about Harold and about the land. She was hesitant at first, wary of the attention. But there was a quiet sincerity about him that reminded her a little of Harold. She invited him in for coffee. They ended up talking for 3 hours. He wasn't interested in the money. He was interested in the stories. He wanted to know about Harold's father buying the land, about the types of trees they had planted, about the history hidden in the old stone walls that crisscrossed the property. He started visiting regularly. They would walk the land together, and he would point out historical features Eleanor had never noticed, while she would point out the geological formations Harold had taught her to see. He admired her strength, her wisdom, her deep connection to her home. He was not intimidated by her wealth. He was impressed by her character. He made her laugh, a real, deep belly laugh she hadn't felt in years. He respected her past and was excited about her future. A new, unexpected seed of companionship began to sprout in the fertile ground of her new life. As for the antagonists, their ruin was complete and lasting. Arthur Sterling was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His name became a synonym for arrogant downfall. The bank was eventually acquired by a larger entity, its name scrubbed from the town's history. The other board members, while avoiding prison, faced financial ruin and public disgrace. They had flown too close to Sterling's son and had been burned in his fall from grace. One crisp autumn evening, 2 years after that fateful boardroom meeting, Eleanor was standing with David on the western ridge, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was cool and clean. Below them, the lights of the town were beginning to twinkle on, including the bright new lights of the library's construction site. The small, discreet mining operation was quiet for the night, a testament to the respectful balance she had struck. "He would have loved this," David said quietly, gesturing to the peaceful valley below. "Yes," Eleanor said, a soft smile on her face. "He would have." She thought of the journey she had been on, from the depths of grief and fear to this place of strength and peace. She had honored her husband, saved her home, and built a legacy that would outlive them all. She had learned that true wealth wasn't in the ground beneath her feet, but in the love she had shared and the purpose she had found. It was in the strength she never knew she possessed, a quiet, deep-seated power that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. The greatest treasures are not always the ones that glitter. Sometimes they are hidden in plain sight, in an old, dusty book, in the memory of a loved one's voice, in the steadfast heart of a person who refuses to be underestimated. The world may value power and noise, but true strength often lies in quiet knowledge, in patience, and in the courage to trust what you know, even when no one else can see it. Eleanor Vance had been given 30 days to surrender her world. Instead, she had shown them all that her world was not for sale, and that the quietest people often have the most powerful stories to tell. She took a deep breath of the cool night air, feeling a profound sense of peace. She was home, and she was living the life she truly deserved.